We are in Scottsdale, Arizona. My name is Monk Rowe, and we're filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have Allen Vache with me today, who is a mean clarinet player.
Well, I don't know if it's mean.
I heard you doing some mean bending of notes in that last set that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, it's stylistically things borrowed from other people. And I studied with Kenny DeVerne when I was in college, and so he's one of the masters of the note benders. Let's put it that way. You know.
Yeah. He's almost the standard of how people get measured these days.
Yeah, you're
as
right.
As far as contemporary jazz players. Mm-hmm. Whatever possessed you to try and make this a living?
Oh gosh. Well, I come from a musical family. My brother is a professional musician. My father was at one point a professional musician, but felt he couldn't support a family on it, so ended up just working weekends and stuff and playing. He played at Nick's and Condon's back in the 30s and so forth. Yeah. And at this particular point, I would say I can't think of anything else that I could have done. I had never had any interest in anything else. I mean, I listened to this kind of music since before I knew what I was listening to, when I was a baby in the crib, you know. So it never occurred to me to do anything else. Yeah.
It's interesting that those early impressions, that they take root with some people and with some people they don't. But you must have an inherent music talent that latched on to that kind of jazz music. Yeah,
I would guess so. You know, it's all abstract, so it's kind of hard to really pin down. But in the same token, I would think that I know, that both my brother and I inherited some form of musical talent that gravitated us towards this kind of music, for improvisational music especially. You know. It's really kind of hard to explain.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you were born when?
1953.
Okay, so the music that was being played most prevalently on the radio by the time you were really aware of it would have been like early rock and roll, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But also things like Peggy Lee and Ray Conniff and all that. But what did you hear in your house?
Well, again, my dad had a humongous record collection that we listened to constantly, and I heard anything from the swing era bands to early Dixieland bands and Eddie Condon style, and it was very funny because when my brother and I went through our adolescent rebellion in our early preteens and teens. Our rebellion against our father was buying Miles Davis records and Charlie Parker records, which he didn't care for, because that was the music that they ruined after he came back from the World War II.
I see. Yeah, look what they've done to my song, right? That's funny. Most teenagers, their rebellion is Steppenwolf and something.
Exactly. That's what all my friends were. That's what they listened to.
Right.
And their parents hated it. I was listening to Charlie Parker records, and my father hated it.
Yeah, yeah. But you eventually, you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, but your tastes maybe worked backwards again.
Yeah, pretty much. I spent a lot of time listening to Benny Goodman records. You know. And becoming a clarinetist, especially. What's available to listen to, as opposed to, because during the bop era, when bop became real popular, there weren't too many clarinet players anymore. Yeah. The clarinet players were Goodman and Shaw and those guys, the guys who led the big bands, but there were a lot more saxophone players, because there were 5 saxophones in every big band, and usually only 1 clarinet player, if any at all. So there were a lot more saxophone players. So therefore, the saxophone became more of a common instrument. But there was still Buddy DeFranco and Tony Scott and a few other guys who were playing the clarinet and playing at bop. So I've been influenced by that. But I know a few of those tunes, but it never really, my sense of improvisation never really gravitated to that style of music. Not that I don't love it. You know, it's like I love to listen to a Mozart symphony, but I wouldn't be very good playing at it.
What was your classical training on the clarinet?
I studied with David Dworkin, who was a clarinetist with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and it was the same situation. I was studying in college. I went to Jersey City State, which is a music college in Jersey City, New Jersey. That's where I grew up. It was New Jersey. So, and I studied with him, and I studied some with Herbert Blayman, who was the principal clarinetist with the Opera Orchestra, Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And then, but both of them were, well aware that I was not interested in becoming a symphonic player or anything. So I would play things that were more jazz-oriented, works like Ravel or Alec Wilder or composers like that. That's what they would have me do, because they would tell me, you're not going to be a classical musician. You're not. What's the point of learning the standard repertoire? If you want to learn just play the instrument, we're here to teach you how to play the instrument better, so you can do the things that you want. They were both very good teachers. And at the same time, that's when I was studying with Kenny.
How did he teach you to play jazz?
Well, he never really taught me to play jazz. You really can't teach anybody to play
Well,
jazz.
that was my next question.
I mean, what he did is kind of steer me in the right direction. As a matter of fact, I was with him in Sarasota at the Sarasota Festival a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this, because it was 30 years ago, practically 30 years ago. And he says, the way I remember it is he used to come over to the house, and I'd show you a couple of exercises that'll help you in your upper register, and then we'd sit down and I'd mix martinis, and we sit and listen to records for about 2 or 3 hours. And that's basically what we did. And we would listen to records, and he'd say, now see what this guy's doing here, and see what this is going on here. And, we spent a lot more time hanging out and listening than we actually did playing.
Wow.
But I'd learned a lot. And he would show me certain fingerings, some of the old upper register fingerings that I use, that I've become kind of like himself, upper register ability, and most of that stuff is things that he showed me, that he developed himself.
Wow.
So I owe a lot to Kenny.
Yeah. When you can't teach jazz, how do you respond or react to all the jazz methods and the university programs and all that kind of thing that are out there now?
Well, I think they're all very good. I think you can teach the basics, the understanding. My biggest problem with most of them is that, somebody writes a book and says, here are all Charlie Parker's solos. Once you learn these, then you'll be a jazz player. I mean, it doesn't really work that way, And they don't really put enough emphasis on listening to people, listening to players that came before. My biggest problem with most jazz education programs is they act like nothing happened before Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie, and there was a lot of great music being made. There was Louis Armstrong, there was Benny Goodman, there was, Jack Teagarden, guys who created great things from nothing. Charlie Parker and Dizzy will tell you the first thing that they did is Dizzy listened to Roy Eldridge, Charlie Parker listened to Lester Young and Jimmy Dorsey, But these people, they don't really want to know that there was anything going on before that. I mean, if you want to hear something innovative, put on Louis' duet record with Earl Hines doing Weatherbird Rag. It's the most amazing thing I've ever heard,
And it's like you said, it came from nothing.
That's right. Like, they didn't have anybody to listen to. They came up with it all by themselves,
Wow, interesting. Did you and your brother have any kind of sibling rivalry going with the music?
Oh, yes and no.
Yeah.
We still have a little bit, but as we get older, it kind of wanes in the noonday sun, as O. Henry said. We learned to live with each other a little bit. But my brother has a tendency to be a little bit high strung. Saying his temper can sometimes get the best of him. So we've had our hassles over the years, but basically we still get along pretty well. And we just did a record for this label that I recorded, an Nagelhire record, Mrs. Vache's Boys. That's been selling very well. It's just got voted number 2 in Jazz Journal International for 1999.
Great.
So, you know, we're both pretty proud of it, you know.
Uh-huh, yeah. You don't call each other up every week and say, so how many gigs did you have this week?
No. You know, I just worked with him a couple of weeks ago in Florida, and we had a little row with each other. But he was not feeling well. He was sick, and he didn't really want to be at the gig. And so it's a typical thing, you know. So we may have like 5 minutes of tension, and then everything we say, oh, forget about it, man, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And your father was supportive in you guys going this direction?
Very much so, you know. I work with so many friends, you know, who tell me how their parents were very much opposed to them going into becoming professional musicians because this business is a crapshoot, you know.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not you're going to be able to make a living at it is very questionable, and a lot of guys can't make a living at it, you know. I have to say that I consider myself fairly lucky. When I was 22, I took a steady job, stayed there for 17 years, and worked with a band, working in a nightclub 6 nights a week and traveling. The Jim Cullum Jazz Band of San Antonio. So I was with him for 17 years, and I mean, I got pretty burned out on it after so many years, you know. And I left, and I figured I was taking a pretty good chance, you know, because here I was off the circuit for a long time, and then trying to break into the circuit. And I had a couple of fairly lean years, but I was lucky enough that I like to think that maybe my ability had something to do with it, but I was able to eventually break into the circuit and do pretty well. You know, I'm not getting rich, but at least so far I don't have any bill collectors pounding on my doors, so I can't complain too much. And if you can do that, I think you do okay in this business. You know.
Someone was asking me the other day, what's the definition of making it big? You know, sometimes kids use that phrase, and I think you almost just defined it. If you're doing what you love, that's a big step right there.
Well, it's like the joke, you know, with what do you call a jazz musician without a girlfriend? Homeless.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, but unfortunately, in so many cases, it's true. You know, but
Jim Cullum is kind of dedicated to keeping alive a certain genre of music.
Yes and no. It's definitely more of a traditional style that he goes for. But over the years that I was on the band, we experimented and did a lot of different things. We never really got into doing, hardcore bop or anything like that.
Yeah.
But we moved into swing and mainstream quite a bit and did some of those kind of things, you know. And we did that. We did that National Public Radio show that I was on for 5 years.
Or at the Riverwalk
Riverwalk,
series,
yeah. And we got into many different styles of playing, depending on, a lot of times we had different guest stars and stuff, like we were doing big band swing when Jay McShann was there. You know, we were doing all of Hootie's big hits, you know, which was that period, and talking about Charlie Parker and so forth, you know.
Yeah.
So it just depended on, you know, and all the guys on the band are great musicians and fairly can adapt to that style. I ended up having to play saxophone more on a lot of those things too. I was playing alto and so forth, you know. Bob Wilbur came in, he and I did a couple of duets on saxophone and soprano and alto and that kind of thing, you know. So it's not really what Jim wants to keep the band doing, but on the same token, for that particular show, you can't just stay in one area. You have to be able to expand some. Otherwise, you're going to lose interest of the audience, you know.
Right. I think Joe Williams appeared on that.
Yeah, that was later on. I'm very disappointed. I was gone by the time Joe appeared on the show, and I would have been great. Yeah.
Well, when you described leaving that situation to go on the circuit, can you describe to me what circuit exists now for you? And
well, I think there's a handful of about 50 to 100 guys who are traveling around the world doing different jazz-oriented things within the spectrum of the music that we're listening to right now, doing these kind of jazz parties, festivals here in the States and in Europe, And, you know, you'll see that you might see my name on one or two of them, and you'll see somebody else's name on a two or three, but next year you might see that reversed. And so that's basically what I'm talking about. Like, I've done a festival or a party where I'm there 1 year, and then I don't come back for a couple of years, and they've got Kenny, or they've got Bob Wilbur, or they've got Abe Most, or they've got, you know, they always get one or two clarinets. Harry Allen does tons of them, you know. And plus doing different tours, there are people who bring bands over for tours in Europe and so forth and so on. There's a couple of guys in Germany. Butch and I were like 8 weeks in Germany a couple of years ago, on the bus doing one-nighters all through the country, you know.
With pickup rhythm sections, or?
Well, no, it was like one of these all-star bands.
Oh,
Again,
okay.
it was Bob Haggart and Butch and Johnny Farrow and Bob Havens and myself and Ed Pulser. I can't remember all the guys on the band, but it was about eight or nine piece band.
Yeah. And the reaction to the music over there?
Yeah, generally, you get a much more enthusiastic reaction than you do here in the States. Plus, you will find the ages of the audiences are much more diversified than they are here. As a general rule, you don't see a lot of people my age or under the age of 60 at a lot of these festivals and parties that I do here in the States, but you do in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's rather a shame.
It is rather a shame. It concerns me, because I wonder what's going to happen, say, 20 or 25 years from now.
Right.
You know?
What is the likelihood of, when you come to these gigs, that you get in a situation where you don't know enough tunes?
Oh, constantly.
Oh,
Constantly. We all have the same situation.
no kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Just as an observer, from
Frankly,
what I've seen, it always seems like you guys aren't at a loss, but I'm almost glad to hear that you're human, and that's...
oh, sure, sure. This weekend I was a little concerned, because there's a lot of what I would consider more contemporary modern players here at this than I'm used to doing on these things, and I'm somewhat a little concerned that the guys are going to start calling up some heavy bebop things, and I'm going to say, gee, guys, I don't really know those, you know, and it's not that I haven't heard them. It's just that I never really took the time to learn them, because I never really had to before. You know,
and the heads on those tunes can
and
be,
some of those, you got to play them exact, otherwise it's not right. I'd really have to sit down and practice them a little bit, you know. But you know, generally, the thing about this is nobody's out to get anybody else. You know, we're not out to hurt it. To see if we can nail this guy or nail that guy. You know, we're all here to have a good time and try to celebrate the music like as best as we can and present it in the best possible way to the audience who's paying the bills for us to see. So I mean, we'll all get together. If one guy says, "Well, gee, I don't really know that tune," they'll say, "Okay, well, let's pick something else." You know, so.
Is there any kind of racial disharmony in the music these days that you're aware of with the players?
I think there is a little bit, but I really haven't experienced any of it. Okay. I've seen situations where, well, and I don't want to criticize anyone, but I mean, for a situation like the Lincoln Center Jazz Ensemble that Wynton Marsalis has, and they're trying to do more traditional jazz, and many of the guys are not that familiar with the traditional styles of music, but they're given the job because they are not white players, they're black players, you know.
Right.
And I think that's unfortunate, you know, but I mean, like, on all the traveling that I do and all the guys that I've worked with over the years, black or white, everybody is always on everybody else's side. I mean, Wendell Brunius is here. Wendell's a wonderful player. I love working with Wendell. He plays great. I mean, Ray Brown,
Yeah.
monster.
Yeah, this festival seems to
We
be
don't
much.
say, I ever see, I don't really, and I travel with Milt Hinton extensively, you know, and Milt was the most wonderful guy in the world and always very supportive and you know, on a one-to-one basis, I have never experienced it, I'm happy to say, you
Yeah.
know. And I hope that it would be less and less as time goes on, you know, because I have experience. I was in a thing with doing a clinic a year or so ago at UCLA with Kenny Burrell, and guys were asking us questions, and this one guy kept saying, you know, since jazz is an African American art form, I mean, where do you get off playing this music and this kind of thing? And I really had to say to the guy, and I said, you know, your history's a little off, because jazz is not an African American art form. What it is, it makes it uniquely American, is it's a merging of African American music and European music. And that's what it made it more unique, plus Creole influences of New Orleans. And because it all happened in New Orleans, and the merging of all these different styles of music, that's what created it, that's what made it uniquely American. I said, it's not just the music of one race. That's what's so great about it, you know. It's exactly the opposite of everything that was going on in the South at the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's a good point. And depending on what history writer you read, sometimes you'll get that opinion and sometimes you won't.
Well, I mean, if you read about the early history of the music from the guys who actually did it, for instance, Alan Lomax's book about Jelly Roll Morton called Mr. Jelly Lord. Jelly Roll Morton, it's basically taken from tapes of Jelly Roll Morton talking about the music and him saying, you know, well, yeah, we listened to the European musicians and we had such and such, and Tony Parenti was there. Tony Parenti was an Italian guy, you know. You know, and so forth, and that's what it was. It was a combination of the African sounds and rhythms and so forth, but also with European styles and European scales and the music that was developed in Europe, you know. So that's like I said, it was what made it so unique. I mean, if you were to try to sit there and say this is strictly an African music, it's not. Because you go to Africa and you listen to what they're doing, they're not doing jazz. They're doing things that had a lot of roots, that jazz had a lot of roots in, but it's not jazz. Jazz was something that was formed uniquely there because of the combination of the different ideas and the different musical concepts.
All right. Well said. A little earlier we were kind of joking about the theory behind music and how it's sometimes overdone and the mode thing and all that. Is it possible for you to describe your thinking process when you improvise and how much of it is affected by your knowledge or lack of knowledge of chord structure and all that?
No, it's affected very much by my knowledge of chord structure.
Okay.
And my ear to be able to hear chord changes. And everything that I do improvisational-wise is, everybody does it differently. Everybody thinks differently. The way I think is chordally by an extension of the chords. For instance, I think, you know, if I'm playing, if it's a G7 chord, I may play the ninth or the flatted ninth or the lowered fifth or these kind of things, you know. And move into the next change. I used to know a guy in New York who used to teach an improvisational course, and he would teach the kids learning chord changes by thinking they were changing keys. You know, okay, now for a while, if you got a 2-5-7 in B flat, you're in B flat, but now if the next chord changes a 2-5-7 in G, you've now changed the key of G, and so forth and so on. And you know, it worked for some of them. It never worked for me. You know, because it confused me. You know, so my approach to was always just what the chord changes are, and you know, and working around those changes and embellishing the changes. You know, I mean, it may not be written the G9, but you can play a ninth on top of a G7, that kind of thing. You know, so and that's basically the way I've always approached it. And what goes on in my mind is I see the notes as if they were, as if I was actually reading them on a page, but
Okay.
But, you know, and up to a certain point.
Uh-huh.
You know, I see some of them. I don't see all of them. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I like that analogy.
yeah.
Right. Because you can almost hear some of them, but not quite all of them.
Exactly.
Either. Some-
Exactly. Well, you got to have a couple in the middle before you get to the
to
next
get
one,
where
you know?
that thing is that you're going to hear. Yeah, those are the passing tones.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do you have experience with the piano?
Yeah, I started on piano.
Okay.
Both my brother and I took piano lessons when we were kids. My father insisted on it.
Oh, well, there you go.
And it's the one thing that he really did for us well. He always insisted, no matter what we played, he said it would give you a basis of understanding the music, you know. So
Yeah.
my brother actually plays better piano than I do because
Uh-huh.
he kept on practicing. I never did, you know.
Yeah. Wow. What do you envision down the road? Do you think 10 years ahead for yourself in the future of this music?
Well, as I said before, Mark, I'm a little concerned about the future of this music.
Yeah.
And I try not to think about 10 years down the road, you know. I try to look at things year by year, and if the phone keeps ringing, I'm in good shape, you know, and so far, so good. But what happens 10 years, gee, I don't really know. I am concerned about it. I live in the Orlando area, so I work at Walt Disney World, some sub out there with other bands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What concerns me is I envision myself end up having to try to get a regular job at
Full-time
Walt
gig.
Disney World, you know,
Yeah.
because I can't make a living any other way,
Right.
you know. But hopefully not, you
Right.
know.
The state of jazz on the radio and stuff that's coming out currently, does it affect your own playing much? Do you listen to the contemporary young guys playing?
Yes, constantly.
Yeah.
And I will say that there seems to be more jazz on the radio now than there was, say, 10 years ago. But most of the stations are public radio stations or college stations and so forth. In Orlando, we have WUCF, which is an excellent jazz station. Now, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about the stuff that they call smooth jazz, no, I don't listen to that
Yeah.
stuff at all. I don't consider that jazz. I consider that a kind of a smooth form of rock and roll,
Yeah.
you know, because I don't know who said it, but to me, if a player does not have a natural sense of swing in his playing, if the phrasing isn't swinging, then it's not worth listening to as a jazz player. And all the great players, no matter where they went in an extension, I mean, from Parker to Coltrane to Coleman or Ornette Coleman or any of these guys, even though how far they extended their improvisation, everything still swung its ass off. You know, I mean, Coltrane could swing like a mother, you know.
Yeah.
And he did constantly, you know. It may not be necessarily the way I would think or somebody else would think, because he was constantly innovative and creating new things, but he was still always swinging, you know. And that stuff with that, you know, like, let's face it, Kenny G can't swing his way out of a paper bag. We all know it. Everybody knows it, you know. But that's not what those people are listening for. They're listening for it, you know, to it's nice background music while you're lighting candles at dinner, you know.
Right. Right.
But the other stations, the public radio stations, college stations like WUCF in Orlando that I listen to constantly. I have it on my car radio all the time, and they're nice. They play some of my records. They play a lot of local artists there. Some really good players from the Orlando area. John Allred, a wonderful trombone player, and a few others. And we all have recorded. They play a lot of local artists. Plus, they play a lot of national things, and you know, within the spectrum of a very good long spectrum of music, from classic and traditional all the way up to you know, super contemporary things that are going on today. I mean, it's worth listening to. You know, you know, it's not everything I enjoy, but I like the idea that these guys are willing to take a chance and play the whole entire spectrum, instead of saying, well, we're not going to play anything that was done before 1950. You know,
Yeah.
which a lot of places do, a lot of stations do.
What's it like trying to find outlets for recording these days? You get hooked up with a good label and try to
Yeah,
stay with them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm lucked into a wonderful situation with a label in Germany.
Nagelhire?
Nagelhire,
Yeah,
and
okay,
they
easy.
have been wonderful to me. I do between 1 and 2 records a year for them. They promote my records. They do all they can. They spend a lot of money in advertising. They've got them. They hired Allegro Distribution to distribute the records all through so they're now in like Borders bookstores and Sound Warehouse and Tower Records and all these places, you know. I mean, and they have, I mean, I can't say enough good things about them. They are the sweetest, nicest people in the world, and they just are just trying to promote good music on records and have done a wonderful job, you know.
Cool.
And they're trying to record the entire spectrum of the music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just did a great thing with Wycliffe Gordon, you know, and they have no prejudices. They like good musicians and good music, you know. So, again, I can't say enough good things about them.
Right.
It's another thing that I consider myself a very lucky person to have met them, you know.
Yeah. Do you do a certain amount of your own promotion to try to keep your name? I mean, like even like a place like this, do you try to make sure that the promoter, you know, doesn't forget about you, or is it not necessary? You think you're in the circuit enough that
Yeah,
they
I think so.
they'll need you,
I
right?
do a certain amount of promotion personally on certain things, like I have a website, a web page.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, I have a little quartet group that Phil Flanagan plays with. We were talking about Phil before, and a couple of guys from Florida where we try to do tributes to the things that Sidney Bechet and Muggsy Spaniard did in the 40s, you know, with just guitar and bass and cornet and clarinet. And we have been trying to promote that some more to get some more work for it. But other than that, that's, you know, the rest of it, a lot of this business is through word of mouth and through recordings. You know, people hear your records and they say, oh, gee, this is a good guy. Let's get this guy, you know. And that's kind of the way it works. So I would say the things that have helped me promotionally wise within the last 5 years has been the Riverwalk radio show, because they still do a lot of reruns, and I'm on the show still quite a bit,
Yeah.
you know. They do compilation shows, too, so they, you know, I may have recorded a whole show, and now I listen to it and I'll hear myself for like 2 tunes and then somebody else, you know. But and the record label, because I've done quite a lot of recording for them in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I've got about, I say, 6 or 7 CDs out so far in the last 5 years. Maybe even a little bit more than that. I can't, because I've also done some things as sidemen for other guys, you know.
These clubs, I mean, these parties here are almost like you have your own little fan club. Sometimes it seems like I see all the people come up and I saw you in Sarasota, and would you sign this? And
yeah, that's what happens.
It's a nice situation.
Yeah. It's nice, and you do run across some of the same people, you know. And like I said, I was saying earlier, you know, I was telling Harry Allen, with all the this is a little bit of a different situation for me, this particular party, than some of the things that, I mean, a lot of the guys, a lot of the parties I work, they don't extend this far into more contemporary music than this party is doing, you know.
Yeah.
Because, you know, again, these people are very opinionated about what style of music they like, you know, and they don't want it to get over that way. But these guys here are a little bit, are extending the envelope a little bit, but it makes me feel a little bit of a fish out of water, because I'm not so sure I fit in with everything that is going on, you know. But I do my best, and I figure, you know, a lot of people seem to enjoy the way I play, so I'm going to do what I do, and if you like it, fine. Well, if you don't like it, okay, I'm sorry, I did the best I could, you know.
Yeah. We might even have a little Latin here this
Yeah, I know. Well, you got one of the greatest Latin players in the business, Dave Valentine, man.
Yeah.
And boy, what a monster he is, man.
Looking forward to that.
But there again, all the guys, all the musicians, nobody's out to get everybody. We're all very, all, you know, on everybody's side. I mean, we had a little party at Don Miller's last night, and Dave and Charlie Sepulveda got up and played a real heavy modern modern thing, you know. And then Don says, "Alan, you want to come up and play?" And I'm like, "You know, guys, I really don't know any of that stuff. I just know some, you know, like kind of standard tunes, you know."
Yeah.
And, you know, Roland Hanna and Jay Leonard say, "Well, Alan, play whatever you want, you know, Bill Watrous, whatever you want. Don't worry about it, man." So, you know,
Right.
you don't have to worry about being challenged or somebody out to get you, because it's not that way,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
This is not a competition, you know. That's my biggest problem with, you talk about jazz education people. That's my biggest problem, is they set up this thing that's kind of a competition, you know. Like, you know, we shouldn't, there isn't enough of us to be out to get each other, you know. We should be on everybody else's side, you know.
Did you ever crack into the New York scene at all?
Oh yeah, well I grew up in the New York, New Jersey area, and you know, I worked Eddie Condon's for quite a while, and I've always been kind of in and out of the New York scene, even though I live in Florida. I just don't like living in New York.
Yeah.
It's not one of my favorite places, you know, and it's not the same place I grew up in. And there's not as much going on in New York as when I was a kid in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, there was a lot more going on then than there is now, you know. There's not very much of a club scene there anymore, you know. And I mean, the clubs that you do, you go in there, work the Cajun on 34th Street, and they pay you $40, you know. Wow. It's really pretty sad, you know.
Yeah.
But most of the guys who were in the scene, you know, I have known and I worked with back in the early 70s and the late 60s, and you know, and I've always kept in touch with them, you know. And a lot of the guys I work with, a lot of them are out of New York. I usually go back there once or twice a year and work some of the clubs that are in New Jersey or New York, you know, and just to keep my hand in and let everybody know I'm still around, you know.
Yeah.
But living in Florida, too, is a lot better than when I was in Texas, you know. I mean, there's a pretty good scene in Florida, a lot of good players down there, Flip Phillips and, you know, the Allred, Bill and John Allred, a lot of great players within Johnny Varro, you know, a lot of guys around there. Yeah. So there's a lot more going on there, you know.
Did you ever have occasion to associate with Saul Yagid by any chance?
Oh, I know Saul very well, yeah. Very interesting guy.
Yeah. We saw him a couple months ago. I was just curious if you knew.
Yeah, I know Saul. Saul's a nice guy, you know. He's a good player, you know, and he's goes a little bit odd, but he's still a very nice guy, you know.
Yeah.
And I've always admired him. I've always thought he was a great player. He's really got all that Benny stuff down.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a real heavy student of Benny, man. To the point of Benny's actions, like dropping the right shoulder and this kind of thing. You know, Scott's got to roll down.
Indeed,
you know?
he does. Well, if you had to make a list of what you consider the top 5 clarinetists in jazz, would you want to?
I wouldn't want to. I don't think I could.
Yeah.
I could probably make you a list of the top 200.
Yeah. Okay.
You know. I mean, especially if we say living or dead. You know, you want to say living. I mean, maybe I could pick 10 guys, but if you want to say living or dead, I mean,
that's tough.
It would be impossible. I mean, you could go from early guys like Omer Simeon or Leon Rapolo to, you know, the more guys like Tony Scott, you know. I mean, everybody, in my opinion, everybody plays a little differently, and there's always something that you can borrow or steal. Basically, what I'm saying is there's always something you can learn from somebody else if they play good. You know? And it doesn't matter. I mean, I spent a lot of time as a kid listening to saxophone players as much as I listened to clarinet players, because I mean, it's amazing the things that you can learn listening to Lester Young or John Coltrane or Charlie Parker or Coleman Hawkins or any one of these guys. I mean, they're still doing the same things that you want to do. It doesn't matter that they're playing a different instrument. And the instruments aren't that different. It's just there's more saxophone players than there are clarinet players.
You got more range.
I do. It's one of the reasons. I mean, I play saxophone, but I don't really spend a lot of time working on it where I could actually be what I would consider a good saxophone player, because I don't have that interest in the instrument. You know, I mean, like but I listen to a guy like Harry Allen, and I think, now, you know, if I wanted to play the saxophone, that's the way I'd want to play it. You know, but it's just it's an instrument that confines me. I feel like, you know, I have more range and more things that I can do on the clarinet, and that's what I want to do. So far, nobody's complained too much. I do still have to take gigs big band gigs where I have to double a little bit. You know, but, you know, I sit there and I read the parts on the tenor saxophone, then the jazz parts comes up and they say play the clarinet. You know.
Yeah. Right. Right. Do any teaching at all?
I did. I don't anymore. Yeah, I did. My fiance is a Juilliard graduate, a master of Juilliard, and she plays clarinet. She's a clarinetist too, and she's got quite a few students, and that's basically what she does. She plays some with the Orlando Philharmonic, but she also, you know, she goes to different schools and teaches for the high school kids and so forth, and she really likes teaching. I always hated teaching. Yeah. I mean, I worked in a couple of music studios, and I would sit and let the kids play and sit there and just look at my watch for the 30 minutes because I was so bored and so unhappy. It's nothing I really enjoyed doing. And I've had some people call me and ask me for like improvisational lessons and stuff like that, and I'm like, well, gee, you know, here's a couple of books that will teach you some of the chord changes, and go out and buy 200 records, and you can save yourself a lot of money in lessons from me, you know.
And throw in a gin and tonic like you and Kenny used to, right? Well, I wish you the best, and I hope in 10 years, as you said, that jazz is still healthy enough.
I hope so too.
That you're able to keep doing what you're doing.
I have to be somewhat optimistic and say that I think it will, because it's lasted a lot longer than a lot of people thought it was going to last now, and just hopefully that it will appeal to a younger generation and at least maintain the status quo that it has now. You know.
Yeah. Well, it's become an art form for sure, considered to be, you know, an art form of American culture, and which is a good thing. Sometimes I wish there was still the club scene that there used to be.
Yeah,
at least as far as training grounds, you know.
That's, you see, I had that, and a lot of kids. That's the shame about what there is today, because kids coming up really don't have that any longer. I mean, like, I can remember going and sitting in the clubs when I was a kid, you know, and you know, it was kind of a sink or swim situation and you know, either you learned or you didn't, you know, and sometimes you weren't treated so well if you didn't do too well, you know, but it was a good learning experience, and the next time you showed up, you'd make sure you knew the tune and you were in better shape and better prepared, you know.
Yeah. Well, enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Well, thanks, Mom. I appreciate your...
We'll be looking for you to other events.
Well, thanks very much.
Is there anything that I didn't talk about that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. We covered everything pretty well.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
very much.